Good morning. It is good to be here this morning. Good to see you. Glad you're here on the second Sunday, which is Denny, if I mess that wood up, you can fix it, right? I'll count on you there. I'll try not to scratch it. Good to see you on a second Sunday of the month, which is actually a birthday Sunday, right? So if you're here to celebrate with your family, a little off schedule this month, usually the first Sunday, but we have some here. I'm glad you showed up to celebrate my birthday. That's awful sweet of you, right? I know that's not why you came today, but that's okay. Hope you'll stay for lunch and enjoy the birthday festivities together and enjoy a meal of fellowship together. We're in our study of Jesus. And in our study of Jesus, we are going through the Old Testament. We began way back before the Old Testament began, in the days before creation. The pre-existing Jesus, the one who was in the beginning with the Father, in a time when before he was Jesus, before he was the man that lived upon the earth and came to die upon the cross. And we're still in that period of time, moving kind of quickly through it to get to a period when he was Jesus, and then we'll go beyond that in our New Testaments eventually as the year progresses on. In Luke 24, in the passage that was read a moment ago, Jesus is post-resurrection now. He has been crucified. He has been raised on the third day. And there were two men headed down to Emmaus, about a 7-mile journey there from Jerusalem, and they were going back home. And on the way back home, they were discussing the things that had happened and how was he really it, but then yet it didn't. And along the road, as they're discussing these things and as they're troubled in their hearts, Jesus, who they don't recognize, and if you go on further in the passage, you will learn that when they do recognize him, he vanishes, which is kind of cool. But anyway, along the road, he says to them two men, not knowing who he is, "O foolish one, do you not know what all the prophets have been saying?" It's interesting that in Luke 24 and verse 25, Jesus would say, do you guys not believe what you've been reading in the prophets? Now you and I, we sat here with our Bibles and we have the Old Testament and the New Testament, but obviously they didn't. And what they did have, though, was writings of the prophets and writings of Moses. It's clear from verse 27 of Luke chapter 24 in the Bible reading a moment ago. But Jesus is asking them, do you not believe what the prophets have been speaking? Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer? How could this man be killed? How did they get to crucify the Son of God? How in the world did God's power not intervene and in some way miraculously take him down off of that cross? He died there. Man, he just come up short of what we thought was going to happen. And Jesus says, but now wait a minute, guys. The prophets have been telling you all this. You've been reading about this. Do you not believe what they've been saying? Of course, they wasn't a part of the resurrection morning with those women there. They wasn't a part of the apostles who had seen Jesus, and so now they're getting a unique experience, but they don't understand the experience at this point just yet. But he's trying to carry them back to the prophets. And so in verse 27, the Bible says, and beginning with Moses, a little bit further back than the prophets, we've looked at Jesus in the book of Genesis, and we've looked at Jesus in the book of Leviticus, the writings of Moses, we believe, and all the prophets. And he interpreted to them, or he explained to them, what the Scriptures had to say. So what do the prophets say about Jesus? Well, I want to give you 3 images this morning. The first 2 of which are up here with me. The third of which I want you to go and be the illustration or prop thereof. Number 1, Jesus was a branch. It's a perfect time of year for this, right? This beautiful branch that will no longer be beautiful, thanks to me, was growing, and it is putting on, it's that time of year, isn't it? They're all around you, aren't they? The branches are going forth. New branches, new shoots are coming up out of the ground for various flowers and the type. It's a wonderful, it's my favorite time of year. It's a reminder that the power of God is still alive and well, that new life is coming to God's creation that's been laying there empty, barren, dead looking. Some of it did die through the winter. But now the branch is growing. It's shooting forth. We think about the branch from the family tree idea. You know, every time someone is born, there's a new branch that goes on that tree. And some of you, if you go back far enough, your family tree looks like a big old 100-year oak tree. It's just branches everywhere. Multiple children and generations existing in that family tree. The Bible, the prophets of the Old Testament paint an image of Jesus being a branch. Most notably in Isaiah 4 and verse 2, in that day the branch of the Lord. The branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious. And the fruit of the land will be the pride and glory of the survivors, the remnant in Israel. Those who are left in Zion will remain and be called holy, and all who are recorded among the living. The Lord will wash away the filth of the women of Zion and cleanse the bloodstains of Jerusalem by the spirit of judgment and a spirit of fire. Isaiah, what are you talking about? Isaiah, what are you prophesying here? What are you trying to explain? Isaiah is explaining a time of cleansing, a time of purification, a time of blood washing. That will all be available. That will all come to fruition thanks to the branch of the Lord that you and I know as Jesus. He's called a branch in Jeremiah a couple of times in the book of Jeremiah, just looking at the prophets in Jeremiah 23, beginning in verse 5. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch. So we learn from Jeremiah 23, we learn the ancestry of this branch. We learn what the family tree is going to look like. And it's going to be the family tree of David. And on that family tree there will be a branch. There'll be a new sprout that'll come eventually, and Jeremiah calls it a righteous branch. And then he goes on to say that he will be a king and will reign and be prosperous. He will execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will dwell safely. And this will be his name, verse 6. This will be his name, the Lord our righteousness. God says by the mouth of the prophet Jeremiah that I am going to raise out of you, I am going to raise out of David a branch that will become king, that will reign and be prosperous. Read Matthew chapter 1. If you don't already know, David is in the ancestry of Jesus. Read Matthew 1. It'll tell you all the males there, and it'll trace you back to Abraham. But on your way back to Abraham, you'll cross David. And Jeremiah prophesied this hundreds of years, centuries before the Messiah was ever born of a virgin. He said there'll come a branch. The branch will grow, it will bud, it will be prosperous. But most importantly, from Jeremiah 23, it will be righteous. Righteousness. And because of His righteousness, you can be righteous as well. The other one found in Jeremiah 33, I think there's about 8 references in total to the idea or the image of branch. I'm just giving you 2 or 3 of them here. In Jeremiah 33 and verse 15, in those days and at that time I will cause to grow up to David a branch of righteousness, and he will execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. Again, almost echoing the words of Jeremiah 23. In Jeremiah 33, the same idea. Zechariah has a couple of passages. Zechariah 6, I believe it is one of them. Zechariah 12 would be the other. There's about 8 different passages in the Old Testament that bring up this imagery. Jesus is called a branch. On the road to Emmaus in Luke 24, when Jesus took those guys back to the prophets, one of the things that he had to remind them of, you've been reading about this branch that is going to come forth from the family of David. Now that branch has come forth. But then there's another image. And I should have went down to the creek and I should have got a big old limestone rock is what I should have got. But the last time I checked, they tell me that vitamin C, if you take too much, it eats your muscles away, and I've been taking a bunch. So I don't have any muscles, okay? So I just had to go get this brick, all right? It'll have to serve as our stone, all right? Jesus in the Old Testament is presented with the image of a stone in 2 different ways. I'll use Isaiah for both to illustrate both sides of this image. Beginning in Isaiah 8 and verse 14. The Bible says of Jesus that he will become a sanctuary, but to both the houses of Israel a stone to strike, and a rock to stumble over, and a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Many will stumble, and they will fall, and they will be broken. Now it is the case that my small little brick here is going to fall down with this illustration if I had a limestone out of the creek bed. One of those large rocks. If you were to not be looking where you were going, and you were to stub your toe, that would hurt, wouldn't it? Cause you to stumble and fall. You're probably not going to do much damage on a brick. But nonetheless, if this were laying out in your yard, and you were to not be watching where you were going, you were to be just carelessly and wandering around and not paying attention to what was in front of you, and you were to kick this brick, even the brick could cause you to trip, fall, stumble, do maybe further physical damage. The first image of the stone that the prophets present of Jesus is that of one that is in place in order to cause someone to stumble. the stone, the rock of offense, if you will. The stone of offense. The stone of, it's in other words, it's that one place there to cause you to recognize what you're doing is not okay. It's the stone that's put there to cause you, maybe to cause you some physical pain. That's okay. But the physical pain is in place in order to wake you up spiritually, to get your mind back on track spiritually. As the house of Israel rebels and disobeys and turns their back on God, God says, I'm going to put a rock out there in front of them so that when as they're just wandering around carelessly, not watching where they're going, they will be approached. They will encounter. They will come upon the rock that's serving as a stumbling stone in order to try to awaken them spiritually. Excuse me. But then there's also the opposite end of the idea of a stone. You'd have to fast forward to the 28th chapter of Isaiah for this one. Again, there's 5 or 6 throughout the prophets, but these two will suffice to illustrate both sides of the point. In Isaiah 28 now, and verse 16, God says, Behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act in haste. Now think about this end of the image of a stone. It would take several of those bricks, right? But if you put several of these things together, you can create a pretty strong structure, can you not? I'm not a bricklayer. Don't claim to be a bricklayer. Don't want to be a bricklayer. But I've watched some bricklayers, and it fascinates me that they start at the corner. It doesn't fascinate me. It makes perfect sense. They start at one particular corner, and they lay the rest of the house in relation to that corner. If that corner is off, then guess what? The prophets say of Jesus that he will become the cornerstone, that he will become the one by which I will lay, not a stumbling stone now, not a rock of offense, not a rock to break down disobedience or to punish rebellion, but now we're building something. Now we're using the stone productively, meaning that it is going to be the starting point for the rest of the building, for the rest of life. You've heard it said, you get Jesus in the right place, and the rest of life will fall into place. You get Jesus in the right place, and the rest of life will fall into place. It's the image that's presented in Isaiah 28 as the tried stone, as the sure stone, as the cornerstone for life, that the rest of the foundation might be sure, steadfast, secure in life. So Jesus, not only as a branch, but Jesus also as a stone, being used in two different ways. As a stone, both ways being important. And so I just come to the New Testament and ask us, to which stone will Jesus be for you? Because in 1 Peter 2, beginning in verse 4, Peter says, and coming to him as a living stone, which has been rejected by men, but is chosen and precious in the sight of God. You also, as living stones, are being built up into a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, offering sacrifices. For this is contained in Scripture. Behold, I lay in Zion, there it is, a choice stone, a precious cornerstone, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed. This precious value, then, is for you who believe. But for those who disbelieve, the stone, verse 7, which the builders rejected, became a cornerstone, but it also became, verse 8, a stone of stumbling, a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey. Peter says, you treat yourselves like living stones. And ask yourself, to which stone will Jesus be for me in my life? Will he be a stone of stumbling, a rock of offense? Will it be because I am disobedient, because I am wandering, because I am careless in my life and how I'm living, and so I keep stubbing my toe on Jesus? I keep tripping, I keep falling, I keep ending up on my face because of Jesus. Every time I turn around, there's that rock of stumbling again. Or will it be that he is for your life the chief cornerstone? The one to which all of life, all of the building goes back to. When you pull a line on that structure, when you look for level on that structure, when you seek to be balanced in your life and to have everything unified and harmonized, you always go back to that stone. And it's because of that stone, that is Jesus, that everything lines up. There's one more image in the prophets, maybe the most prominent image within the prophets. And here's the one that I can't bring up on stage. You've got to go do it for your own life, and that is a servant. A servant. What does a servant look like? What is that? Who is that prop for life? What is it that Jesus can do for us as the perfect servant? Isaiah 42, the prophets are full of them. I'll just give you 3 or 4 for time's sake. A bruised reed shall not be broken, and smoking flax shall not quench. He shall bring forth judgment into truth. Speaking of the time in which Jesus would live on this earth and the servant that he would become and the things that he would accomplish, it says in verse 4 of Isaiah 42, he shall not fail nor be discouraged. I chose this one because I have to admit to you that one of the hardest challenges to servanthood is discouragement. Nobody likes to be discouraged. Nobody likes to fail. Nobody likes to be unappreciated. Nobody likes to be overlooked. Nobody wants to continue to do things for people in a very unselfish way when they don't seem to care or seem to acknowledge or seem to appreciate. Jesus lived his entire life like that. He lived every day of his life in a selfless way, trying to serve others, and constantly there were people who didn't appreciate him, didn't value him, treated him awful, didn't thank him, over and over again. And you ask yourself the question, how could he be a perfect servant? And the answer is he did not fail, nor did he become discouraged until all was accomplished that he was set out to accomplish. Isaiah 50. The Lord God has opened my ear, verse 5. And I was not rebellious. I turned not backwards. I gave my back to those who would strike it, my cheeks to those who would pull out my beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. You want to talk about a servant? Let me ask you to go into a situation in which you will be beaten. You will have your hairs pulled out. You will be spit upon and disgraced at every turn. And let me ask you to endure that for the sake of God. Serving isn't always easy, is it? Being a servant requires us to get dirty, to involve and to sacrifice and to give up our own selves and our own lives and what we want. And it's not always the chosen position to be in, but Jesus chose it. I know you understand Isaiah 52 and Isaiah 53. We could just read those whole entire chapters. Isaiah 53 and verse 7, he was oppressed. He was afflicted. I was just trying to find one verse that would give us a good snapshot. Yet he opened not his mouth. You want to talk about a servant? He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before the shearers is dumb or silent. So he opened not his mouth. He stood there as a servant, knowing that he was being falsely accused and falsely ridiculed and falsely crucified. He stood there as a servant. See, I can't bring that up on stage. You got to go do that. You got to go be that. And so do I. This is who God has called us to be. Though he was a son, Hebrews 5, he learned obedience by the things he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all those who would obey him. Though he was a son, he became a servant. And in so becoming a servant, let me just stay a son, God. You see, sons are heirs, and sons are privileged, and sons are given the best that the father has to give. But servants they live on the back 40 of the property, and they're given what's left of the family meal, and they're given the jobs that nobody else wants to do. Jesus said, I'll leave home as a son to go be a servant and to do the work that nobody else wants to do. You see, I wish there was something in the backyard out here that I could go get and bring in to say, hey, here's a servant. Get you one of these, and you've got a servant. No, what you got to get is you got to get Jesus. And you got to get him in the right place in your life, and you got to keep him there, because then and only then will you ever be a servant of God. You got to go find the right attitude, the right mentality, the right heart, the right motivation, the right willingness, the right humility, the right kindness, the right compassion. Oh, this ain't out there in the backyard anywhere. It's about being a servant. As you look through the prophets, what do they say about Jesus? They describe him as a branch, one budding forth, bringing life, new life, the hope of life, the salvation of life, the eternal blessing of life. When you look in the prophets, how do they describe Jesus? They describe him as a stone, as a rock, as one that was called stumbling, but also as one that used properly can be the chief and the head and one that guides the rest of the stones in the building of life. When you read the prophets, how do they describe Jesus? They describe him as a servant. As one who would live his life for the betterment of others. Who would give his life for the betterment of others. Jesus. Oh, you knew before you got here this morning. He's all in the prophets. Hundreds of prophecies about him. Everything from where he's going to be born to how he's going to be born to what he's going to do to how he's going to die to how he's going to get back to the throne of heaven and everything in between. In the process thereof, he's asking you and I to be branches. He's gone on to a bigger responsibility now. Read John 15. He's now the vine. We are the branches. I am a new shoot, new life brought to the vine of Christ. And it's imperative to me that I be fruitful. What about you? You're the branch now. What does your branch look like? Is it alive? Is it fruitful? Is it growing? Is it promising new life? Jesus said, I'll be the cornerstone, but I'm counting on you, Peter said in 1 Peter 2, to be living stones that are being built up and constructed together. Are you that stone laying out there in the yard that you've been meaning to move for 3 springs now that you keep tripping over? Because you're rebellious, you're wandering. Jesus says, get in the building here. Get in the family. Let's build this together. Let's construct something that is helpful and valuable. Be the stone of building, not the stone of offense or the rock of offense. Jesus said, I'm going to come be a servant. And that's what he did. And now he's asking you and I to be nothing more, nothing less than servants. You want to go to heaven? Here's how you go to heaven. You glorify God in all of your being. You seek to serve God in all of your being by being a servant of His, like Jesus. Are you? If you're not being that this morning, would you come? As together we stand and sing.